Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As I say, better late than never. Appreciate everyone's patience. We're all here and ready to get cracking on this. This webinar today is going to cover a lot of the important points of what is happening right now in the merger and acquisition space. And I want to first introduce our first two guests, our only two guests, our guests first. I'll let each one do their own introduction because they're going to speak it a lot better than I can. So first up is Tom Goldblatt with Ravinia Capital. Tom, I'll let you get a little introduction about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me on this, and it's a lot of fun. It's great to be on a panel with an old and good friend, Jason, too. So if it's anything as interesting as the conversations we normally have when we run into, it's going to be great. So I'm managing partner of Ravinia Capital. We're a boutique investment bank. Primarily, we do sell-side M&A, selling middle market companies. Generally, they're privately held companies. We also have a specialty in working on tough deals, special situations, distressed deals, and those we might sell them, but we try to help the people where we find them. So it might be getting them debt capital, or it might be a lot of times like finding that they need a equipment loan, and we might call Loeb. So really looking forward to discussing M&A. It's always I find fascinating topic, and look forward and glad to be a guest on this.
Thanks, Tom.
Sorry, we're having technical issues, and so I'm balancing a phone and this webinar at the same time. It's great to be here on a panel with Tom. My name is Jason Kuyama, and I am a partner at Godfrey & Kahn in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I primarily practice in corporate and M&A, both in the regulated and non-regulated spaces. I'm really also looking forward to this conversation, in part because Tom is my counterpart. And Tom is one of the most creative deal solvers. I'll use that word on purpose, solvers, that I know. One of the most connected people in the Midwest, and so happy to be here.
Thanks, Jason. I could definitely say when you talk about creative deal making, that I think that's really where your name shines.
Appreciate that.
And from my side, just a brief intro, although this is really much more focused on Tom and Jason and their expertise. But I'm Eric Schwartz, the Chief Information Officer at Loeb. Loeb, since 1880, has been helping manufacturers and financial institutions leverage their industrial assets by managing the equipment lifecycle. What does that really break down to? We help companies in a lot of different ways within their industrial asset space, from term loans and equipment lines of credit, sale leasebacks. We do USPAP appraisals. We do auctions and liquidations, and help companies with inventory management within their equipment and machinery space. We're a fifth generation company and have been in Chicago since the get-go, although we operate definitely at least North America and a lot of times internationally, depending on our line of business. So today we're going to dive into how to better manage risk, unlock value, move deals forward, and the ever-changing and ever-challenged M&A environment, especially as we speak right now. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the market landscape and the deal trends and what has been coming up from Tom's side. Tom, if you could start and give us some ideas of some of the bigger overarching trends you're seeing in M&A, especially the mid-market. Sure. And
Yep. Well, in the M&A in the last, just kind of taking it back, 20, 30 years has been really a continual movement towards a bigger and bigger role with private equity being a bigger part of it. It used to be more of a rare thing. Now it's the majority of the middle market. At the same time, we've seen over that time, valuations kind of creeping up. From the time I'm dating myself, when I kind of came out of college, companies used to be at like 3 to 5 times was like a fair price for a company. And that really did make a lot of sense. And we've seen a continual movement up in valuations due to the private equity money, due to, the interest rates having gone down to, near nothing, during the Great Recession, after that, and then again with COVID. So a continual movement up. A trend too used to be that private equity would never buy from another private equity firm, and now it's the majority private equity to private equity. Having said all that, things shifted in August of 22, exactly at the time when the Federal Reserve started trying to catch up with inflation, and they started raising interest rates. At that moment, M&A, which had boomed, had its record years in 21, record in transaction, record in valuation, really went on hold. And we've been kind of living with that since. So there still, of course, is always going to be a certain amount of M&A where people are changing hands with companies, and there's just a real lot of money now seeking these type of transactions. But the basic thing now has been this year, going into this year, that hold was really expected to change with the Trump administration coming in. It was very, very optimistic in January that this was going to be the biggest big year in M&A. Finally, the hold would kind of stop because of deregulation, because expected that it would be a very M&A, and it actually didn't work out that way because there's so much uncertainty due to tariffs, and not only that, but where the interest rates will lie. It's still kind of now. You're going to get different viewpoints, and constantly people. Well, there's a lot more big mergers going on. That's partially because there's been a lessening of that antitrust, and there's certainly a pent up. But I'm curious to hear what Jason has to say. It's been a very busy summer for us, but that's been kind of different oddball distressed and restructuring deals that really don't have to deal with one another, but mostly had either incompetent management or shift that we had to kind of come in and try to get to keep the companies alive, get them to a new buyer. Jason, what are you kind of seeing out there, or do you agree with my little brief history there of the last couple decades of M&A?
Well, I'm grayer than you, but I dare I say I think I'm a little younger than you, so I don't know how many decades I can go back, but I will certainly agree with you. 2021 was a banner year. Maybe 2022 to a slightly lesser extent. We did see a pretty precipitous relative to 21 and 22 drop off in 23 and through today. I think you're right. There are still deals out there. We're still very busy. It's not hair on fire busy like it was 21, 22. One comment you made about the increased involvement in PE, I wanted to go back to. I think a lot of that has to do, especially recently, with what you had mentioned later on about interest rates. With interest rates going up, just leveraging deals through traditional financing got far more expensive. Banks, by regulation, cannot be as creative in the way that they're structuring a transaction from a lending side. They certainly cannot be as creative as private equity can be with some combination of debt and equity. And so I think going forward, we saw a 25 bip drop yesterday. They're signaling another 50 bips and maybe 75 bips over the next 2 years. I don't know if that's enough to change the current landscape of the bigger involvement of PE for the short term, at least.
Yeah, and I think you were getting at too. It's that even the credit side has changed from commercial banks to private credit, and private equity is shifting itself. Where it used to be a slew of funds that are basically 100 million to 400 million, kept going up, and now the vast majority of them are these very large publicly traded funds.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
What would you say Tom, at this point, the role of capital and financing partners, as you just kind of said, that we've seen some challenges in traditional financing and have gone to private equity and other sources of capital. What's the role been like there in enabling or not enabling the transactions in your world?
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely been fuel to raise the valuations. Is there's been more and more competitors to kind of get into deals. Their risk tolerance has been higher, and their amount of multiple of cash flow has gone up. And so new entries come in, they raise very large funds, and then they have to put the money to work. Having said that, I would say that and we deal with a lot of difficult deals. I don't find that there's like really in the M&A world, there's dumb money out there. It's basically it comes down to who's got the going to put the risk and the return is worthwhile. And that's why in the type of deals we do in the middle market, the lower middle market, where it's uncertain what the future profit's going to be. That's why the kind of Loeb is a very important type of partner for us, in the sense that we often have to turn to what's solid here. The cash flow is not solid. The receivables and inventory are often already gobbled up by a commercial lender who's got a blanket lien on it. And so we're looking for any way to create liquidity. And that's why the deals we do, a lot of times Loeb or an equipment lender can provide that runway we need to get a process done.
And we appreciate every time the phone rings and it's you on the other side, because we always know our sweet spot and love to be able to help there. What would you say that you're seeing most often in deals that creates friction, and what are some early warning signs that tell you that a deal might likely not go through or might have trouble down the road?
Yeah. Well, you can see the signs right up. And so one thing is that it takes a lot to get a deal to the finish line. It doesn't necessarily take a lot to start it, but it takes a lot to finish it. And you're going to have to, everything's going to come out, and you really have to be committed to it. And it's an onerous process, because you have to, every possible potential issue comes up. And so unless we see real commitment and willing to put kind of, money up for retainers, get like a sell side diligence, or another area, like if we have equipment that we're going to sell, we want to make things frictionless so that it can go quicker. So getting an appraisal of the equipment, like working with Loeb for something like that, would be good. So what we see is that people have to really want to close. You can't bring them in. It can't be, well, let's just try it. To get to the very finish line, people have to really, really want it on both sides.
Thanks, Tom. That's it's very apropos, and it certainly is. As I hear from you more and more nowadays, you're starting to identify spaces where you see the challenges up front, and that obviously is helpful.
I will say, even with now having better idea of like seeing a deal that we get pitch or get a lead on that looks like it could be a good deal, but you see these warning signs. Unfortunately, a lot of times we look past our own advice because we become kind of deal horrors and just want to do the deal, or we think, well, I'll just charge enough of a retainer that will overcome the difficulties and like lack of communication or other things. And the fact is that it really doesn't. And these, even though you might close some of them, you really should be more particular. I like to say the quote, "Experience is what you gain right after you really needed it."
I like that. And it's so true because no two deals are the same, no two structures are the same, and
Yeah.
you learn something every single time. Obviously, you have your basics that
Yeah.
you have to bring in as a foundation
Well, like
every
if they
time.
have like very poor books and records, for instance, it's like, oh, we'll figure it. And these things that it's like interviewing somebody. These little warning signs that you kind of, okay, that could be trouble. No, we'll get past it. They become bigger issues later on. You take a lot of times we have clients on pitches. I'm sure we all see this. Is you get a lead and you follow up with them and you have a really great first call. In fact, they're like, "Oh my gosh, thank the Lord that you exist and stuff." And then then you go to the next step to send them an NDA to get it, and then you're ghosted for weeks. And you're like, and then you're starting to feel like you're pushing them when they wanted to have the transaction, and then maybe 5 weeks later they pop back up and say, "Yes, we're interested," and you start to talk again, and then they disappear again. And generally, I find those aren't really good cases to take on. But as I said, unfortunately, sometimes I still do.
Yeah, Eric, I often get asked, what's a early red flag you should look for in a deal, and Tom hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I usually recommend for my clients, don't just send a due diligence list through email and wait for it. It certainly doesn't hurt for the two CEOs to have lunch or dinner together and start talking about and setting expectations. It sounds like a very basic thing, but it's really not. So set those expectations about timing, response, and if those aren't met, you're not getting a response to a due diligence request. The financials you're getting are disorganized. There's just complete disarray in the documents you're getting. It's probably a sign of what is to come for the way that company kept its records and books and the way the deal is going to go.
Yeah, we see a lot, where it really becomes more and more important to really judge who you want to go forward to. So we generally go out and then we have an IOI deadline and phase to kind of cut back the crowd. So we go out pretty broad generally, and then we'll say we're going to have an IOI deadline, and typically it's about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. We do something that's unique, and we often have a webinar for the buyers in, and we want to make things as frictionless and give as much information. And what we find is you got to be careful, because maybe the majority of these private equity and other buyers, they spend about 10 minutes looking at the deal, and then they put in a IOI to see if they can kind of grab it. And then once they get in, then they're going to look for opportunities to hire diligence people and trade down when you're vulnerable. So the more I do this, the more I value those that really put in the work and really look closely, ask intelligent questions. And I also find that if people are committed, you don't need so much time, particularly if the investment bank does their job up front, has a really good SIM, has an organized diligence room, has done appraisals. If there's real estate, you got the phase one done. You really have thought through so people can look. I find that people can analyze it pretty much in 72 hours or so, but they can take weeks and weeks and get nowhere. And that's why we can get on the distress side, as long as we got it going, we can get deals closed in less than 60 days. And we have no problem. In fact, it's a competitive process. But if a process does not have real deadlines and not commitments, it will definitely go 8 months, 12 months, more than that, because it just gets really slow. The attorneys start turning that document, and it's going to be 1.5 weeks between turns. And that's why another thing I like for getting deals done, and I'm sure Jason agrees, is like you start to have a lot of issues, particularly near the end. Get everybody together, get them in the room, have your list of issues, and don't leave that room until you resolve it. That solves a lot and cuts up a lot of time, because time is not the friend of deals. And the world changes. And I often talk about with letter of intents. They're wonderful, and you have a written agreement. You come out, and it seems like we really have an agreement. Well, what happens is time goes on. Things change. You have a good month, a bad month. You could have. I remember like when 9/11. Every deal that was on the table basically off. So you really have to try to really push deals and try to get them done, because the longer they go, they're not like wine. They don't get better.
Yeah, Tom and I hear this term all the time, but it's called deal fatigue, and it's real. I mean, it is a real issue, is deal fatigue. But yeah, Tom's not going to say this because he's not going to give a shameless plug. But anyone on the sell side should really heed what Tom was saying about getting a well put together sim, having somebody who's providing a lot of organization. Because many times I'll have clients reach out to me and say, hey, we're looking to sell. We think we're going to do it without an investment banker. We don't want to pay the fee. Mm-hmm. And you have to have a real conversation with them, because it makes our job significantly harder, because we're not investment bankers, we're lawyers. And more than likely, you're not going to achieve the best price, because that's what an investment banker will do for you. But just to get over this hump and avoid deal fatigue is absolutely worth these points that you're going to pay an investment banker. It is. And I can't say that enough. It's 100% true.
I'm going to have you say it one more time in the next pitch we do. No, you're right.
Look at that.
Two
of you are going to materialize a deal on the call here, on the webinar.
Yeah. It's so often the time that a seller is thinking about hiring one and has a conversation, and then they're like, well, we've got this one company that called us. We think they're the best buyer. We're gonna kind of work down the path with them. If it doesn't work, we might consider it. And almost every time doesn't work. And it's not only, like you're saying, Jason, that it's the best price, but you really have to have a multiple of people competing. People have to understand that they're competing for it, because when people feel that they're the only one in the game, they definitely kind of start to take advantage. And if they find something that's not like, and then when you're selling, you don't know when they trade down is that fair or not, because you haven't cleared the market. And companies are different. It's not like selling real estate. It's not like selling a commodity. Every single one of them is different. Every day is different than it was a year before. And so you don't know how it's going to go until you get into it. And sometimes we find, we play this game with the management and the owners at the beginning of a process. Once we're engaged, we sit down, one of our early meetings, and we get out an envelope and we say, everybody should write down who they think is going to be the buyer and put it on a piece of paper, and we put it in an envelope, and then we see. And the thing that comes up is that it's almost never is it anybody on their list, because there's just a ton of different buyers that have an interest in that company for their own particular reason. And so it's really, we're big advocates of going broad and having a well-run, structured, competitive process.
Well, and don't forget, for those listening, that to the extent you're not a closely held company, you have shareholders. There are, depending on what state you're in, the qualifications are different in every state, but there are fiduciary obligations to your shareholders to get that best price, whatever that looks like based on how the state common law and statutes define it, but to get that overall, quote, best price. And running a process typically, can help you get to satisfying that obligation to your shareholders.
Jason, let me ask you, what would you say are like legal red flags that companies should look for early in negotiations?
Yeah, well, I started to mention a couple of them. I think lack of candor is the biggest one. To the extent you're not buying just equipment and assets, and it's an asset purchase, and that's it. To the extent you're actually buying a company, having a good conversation with the executives is really important. Having an open and honest conversation, in part because their staff, their employees, are going to be the lifeblood of what you're buying. And you really have to understand the culture of the company that you're buying, the products and the customers that they have. And if the executives can't talk openly and easily about that, that might be kind of your first flag of, geez, is there a disconnect here between the executives and the employees? And where that starts to lead into other issues is you start thinking, okay, well, what do we have to look at with these employees? Are some of these employees under change control agreements? Are these employees flight risks? And now you start thinking about in the broader picture of the deal, what am I actually getting? Because if all I'm going to be getting is assets, then maybe I should go revert to an asset purchase. If I'm really trying to buy this company as a going concern, I have to make sure I'm getting these employees, that they're not a flight risk, that they're not so thankful they're getting some payout as a result of the sale, that they're just going to go off and work for one of my competitors because they don't have a non-compete or whatever the case might be. So you really have to, I think it starts with that conversation. And then it broadens out to, as I mentioned, the underlying documentation. It shouldn't be hard for a well-run company to produce, maybe not every document up front, because some of these due diligence lists, certainly the ones that we'll prepare are detailed, okay, because we do this a lot and we know what to look for. But even a basic initial due diligence list should be something that a seller can satisfy relatively quickly. Financials, AR, agent reports, any high-level employment or compensation level, type agreements, things like that, should all be something that they can essentially just scan a file and give to you. And if it's not that case, you have to start thinking about how many more surprises am I going to get throughout the deal? Is this going to be expensive? Am I going to spend all these legal dollars getting to a point where I realize I can't pay what I thought I could pay for this because there's too much risk, or I have to back out too much that they're just going to walk, and now I have wasted legal dollars?
Yeah.
Fair point. One of the things we always say, my appraisers and when people go on site is just like this. I mean, when we're doing a financing deal, if they're not able to produce the documents in any clean or easy way, if there's a lot of friction in that process, a lot of times it gives us pause. And the second thing is when we walk into a manufacturing operation, we go to the maintenance room first. Because the maintenance room, it's just the same analogy. If the maintenance room is not neat and tidy, what do you think is going on in the rest of the the manufacturing facility? Same type of an idea brings up in my mind. Jason, what do you? I've got to imagine that every deal has a different cadence and speed. I've got to imagine more often than not, people just want to get deals done. How do you balance speed with diligence in today's environment?
Work late nights, work weekends. I mean, it's tough. There certainly is a desire to get deals done quickly. And I think, especially with companies that tend to be serial acquirers, they are very used to the concept that Tom and I just talked about in terms of deal fatigue. They want to get through transactions very quickly. Somebody who's gone through a couple acquisitions knows what to look for. And so, they tend to want to rocket the deals very quickly. And I think that's very possible if you have on the sell side somebody who's very organized and very responsive, right? It can be a very quick deal, a month and a half, easily. But I tend to find in practice, there's oftentimes a disparity. Either the seller's really well organized and the buyer's never been through a deal, or vice versa, right? Or some combination thereof. And it's not unusual for an initial conversation that lawyers have with their clients that, oh, we'd like to get this done by X date. And okay, well, we'll talk about that more. But it's an entirely unrealistic date, and we know it. And so part of that initial discussion is explaining to them, listen, we're not here to drive up fees. We're not going to drive up fees. If you know what you're doing, you can drive due diligence and you can do a lot of this stuff before we have to even get involved. But it's an idea of trying to set expectations that you may think this deal is going to go fast, but more than likely it's not. Now, I live in a lawyer world, and so we're by nature pessimists. But, I don't know, Tom, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I see also sometimes people aren't fair to the lawyers in the sense, or the client, like they don't want to commit to until they're later in the deal to start to run up the M&A. They've got us on retainer, and so they tend to have us do as much as they can. And once the lawyers start, then it starts to get much more real. But what I find to help the lawyers a lot, we like to get them involved really early. We like to get from them what's going to be a diligent, what ultimately are the disclosure schedule, what releases do we need? Because it's these things that really, when you talk about at the end, and each day is critical. Wait, we need to get this release. We need to, and then your lawyers, you're putting all this pressure on them. But really, this stuff could have been done much earlier. It's a tough role that Jason's in, being an M&A attorney, because you've got to carry a lot of different characters. You got to be smooth, you got to be strategic, but then you also got to be willing often to work through the weekend when something has to be ready on Monday. So I have a lot of respect for lawyers. I was a lawyer myself. I'd like to hope I treat them well. I can be pretty demanding, but a great lawyer, and also I guess there's different stripes. I like a lawyer that is getting it done, is recommending, is not a deal killer, is a deal maker. But the lawyer is in a role a lot of times where they got to point out that the baby's ugly, or they got to bring up these risks that and as an investment banker, you're just trying to get through this stuff. But if a lawyer that can be a collaborative partner and can bring these things up and comes up with creative solutions to get the parties together, those are the type of lawyers we like to work with. One last thing, Jason, I would say, it's like with lawyers, you can be friends with them for a long time. And once you get them on a deal, it goes one of two ways. You either want to work with them forever, or you never want to work with them again.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's I think the most salient point that Tom made, and maybe this sounds like a shameless plug on our side, but is getting lawyers involved early. That doesn't mean that the lawyers have to be babysitting and running up the clock, okay? But getting lawyers in on a transaction early does help formulate a plan. That plan theoretically will save you money on the back end. I can give a very quick war story. Is we were selling a company and we identified early on for them an issue with their shareholder agreement. They didn't have self-effecting terminations in it. They had multiple sales in the buy-sell agreement, the shareholder agreement. And we advised them early on, start working on this and cleaning this up. It's going to be an issue for the buyer. We're not going to raise it with the buyer, but we think it's going to be an issue with this buyer. And, oh yeah, we hear you, but it's good. This is how we've operated for 30 years. We kept following up with them, and the deal went a little quicker than everyone expected. And last minute, sure enough, the buyer says, oh my gosh, we missed this, and you have to clean this up. And it held up the deal. And suddenly everyone's working overtime to get the deal closed on something that we identified early. Now, clients don't have to do what we say, right? That's I think one of the best things a lawyer can recognize is that we are vendors. We're here, as Tom said, to raise issues. We are not here to impede your deal. We're not here to tell you how to run business or tell you how to run a sale. Tom knows how best to run a sale, and the company, who's his client, knows best how to run their business. Our job is simply to advise everybody of the issues that are there. And I think one of the things that certainly I do, and I know every one of my partners does early on with young associates, is train them that when they raise an issue, you can raise the issue, but the best way to raise an issue is to raise an issue, but have already thought through a way to solve it. And I think that's the key differentiator among a lot of lawyers and law firms is, are you just raising an issue and kind of dumping it out there and saying, it's a problem? Because then it sounds like you're coming off and saying this is a problem and it'll kill the deal, versus, hey, this is an issue, but this is how we think we can solve it, and we should talk to the buyer about solving it this way. And I think that's where lawyers provide the best value. And again, even though everyone thinks every deal is the easy one, they always tell lawyers, oh, this will be an easy one, this is a small deal. Practice shows every deal has its issues. And if you can identify those issues and provide solutions for them up front and early on, it just makes everything go smoother and it frankly leads to lower fees.
Yeah, I get one of the things I like about working with Jason and his way he goes about it is Jason looks at things like a business person. He's looking for creative solutions. If you tell him a deal even he's not working on, he starts coming up with people, his clients or other solutions that might be helpful to you. So you end up kind of in Jason's world a lot because he is, a creative deal solver. And as I mentioned, like a lot of times we work with a lot of different law groups. We normally don't pick the lawyer, the client picks the lawyer. And I don't mind that because you want the client to have a lot of trust in but we get all shades. And it's really nice to have a lawyer that actually is assisting you think through things, is getting the work done. It's much better for getting to a close and a lot more enjoyable.
Well said. Well said. One last question I want to throw out there before we open up to a question or two, as we're running at the end of our time here. What's one thing that you each wish more businesses knew before they enter into an M&A situation?
I'll take that. I think that don't look for the perfect, and don't be so scared about everything. So we get all shapes, like people like wanting to, you can't sign the register when you come in. You can't send an email. They don't want you to send an email to their regular work accounts. And then we get others that basically bring in the whole company and let everybody know what's happening. And frankly, over the times I've worked, I find that you're much, much better off letting everybody know. Everybody is going to eventually know. They all feel like they're part of it then. And they can be, you can desensitize the fear, so I think what I wish people, they get overly paranoid. We do everything we can when we send out the NDA and the teaser, which is a one-page anonymous document to keep the company name out of it. And, sometimes somebody will guess that it's this company or not. And then people are up and generally there really is no damage. It ends up, so I guess the one thing I wish everybody would know is that it's going to be a long process. Don't worry about everything. It's going to work out. Be more inclusive and transparent than less, and you're going to get to a much more likely a close and have everybody on your side rather than working against you.
Yeah, I think the only counterpoint I'd add to that, or maybe make, Tom, is that a lot of companies care a heck of a lot about their employees. And believe it or not, when we're working with people who are serial buyers and do a lot of acquisitions, they actually also do care about those employees. But sometimes that discussion isn't had up front, right? And so you have a seller where the owners or the executives are worried, well, I don't know yet what any severance plan looks like. If they can't keep everybody, I don't know who's staying, who's going. And so they're worried about bringing everyone over the wall. And then, on the acquiring side, they're thinking about this deal of, holy cow, this is a great acquisition and we need every single one of these people or it doesn't make sense. And if they're not having that conversation up front, then that's where you get this little cat and mouse game. And it's like, oh, do I tell people? Do I bring people over the wall? Do I not? And that's just another plug for maybe, and it's not always run this way. Before you're actually accepting the IOI and going exclusive, maybe it's an opportunity for the selling side to sit down and have conversations with the potential buyers before they accept, just as a gating matter, instead of accepting the IOI, then saying, okay, let's schedule a lunch or a dinner and talk about what this looks like. That might be one way to handle it. I think from my side, something that I wish everybody sort of knew about a transaction is that the vendors, and be honest, that's what Tom and I are, vendors. The vendors are here to help you. We're not here to interfere with your deal. Tom's team provides not only value on the liquidity side, right, on the actual cash sale side by driving up that price. They provide value in just the general counseling that they're providing you throughout the deal to keep things calm so that you're not staying up at night, can't sleep, all that stuff. And we're doing something similar, but more from an aspect of, we've read this agreement and we've figured out how to deal with it. And we know how to deal with this notice provision and whatever the case might be. And being open with your advisors is really the best way, I think, to get a smooth transaction. There's many times where we're dealing with clients, and some of which are very sophisticated, and we've worked out a system where they're doing all the due diligence, they're doing everything, they're bringing us in the last minute to negotiate the agreement, and it's appropriately carved out that they're responsible for missing stuff in due diligence and whatever. But there's a lot more clients where they don't have that level of sophistication and they need us. And getting the planning sessions and having everybody listen. But on the flip side, having Tom and I listen to the client on what their priorities are so that we're not going down rabbit holes. I think it's that open communication and establishing that trust and that working together sort of idea up front is critical.
I appreciate both of those comments. If anybody has any questions that they would like to post for any of us here, feel free to post it in the comments. The one thing that I was thinking about that I would add in this space specifically as pertains to us, and number one, call up Jason or Tom. That's a shameless plug for the both of you if you need help on either side of no matter where you are in the transaction. But the other thing that I would add from the machinery and equipment side is, number one, make sure you get a good appraisal, a true market appraisal, so you know exactly what you're getting into. Last thing you want to do is make an acquisition and then go and walk into a plant or into a rolling stock situation and you've got a bunch of junk or something that's going to require some major maintenance or some issue or anything like that. Especially like a USPAP, true market appraisal, something that really gives a good feel for the value. And then the other thing that I was thinking about is don't be afraid to explore in the finance side, alternative finance solutions like us. You don't always need to have a traditional, bank finance deal, especially if you want flexibility. We have a lot of private equity clients that come to us for the leverage, and because we can move very quickly and close on our financing within, sometimes as little as 4 weeks, what we shoot for. But there's an opportunity there to be able to leverage what's existing in the company being acquired's asset pool to be able to use for finance or to be able to buy out the company with. So we have a lot of situations like that. So that's very helpful. Let's see. I don't see any questions coming through. I know we're running a little late, so we may have lost a few people here. So again, for those who are left, appreciate your patience. We had a little bit of a technical snafu on the way in, but look, we pulled through. No problem. So here we are. Well, that brings us to the end here. Thanks everybody who's for joining, and thanks to Tom and Jason for joining us and being guests here. This was a really great experience. We've all learned a lot from every angle, and hope to see you on future webinars that we'll host going forward. Thanks again, and
thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everybody.